on Vanishing Chapter 3, Part 2. New models are pushing back against the dominant setup, giving me some reason for hope. I had the good fortune of spending an afternoon at one of these alternatives, memory care at Allenbrook in Williston, Vermont. Had opened a few months before my visit in April 2018. It is a ranch-style home where 14 residents who have dementia live in individualized apartments and share cozy, natural light-filled common spaces. When I arrived, the smell of cookies baking in the kitchen wafted through the living room where some residents were chatting and playing cards, while others were watching a nature film. I noticed that the telltale signs of a healthcare institution are absent. There were no medication carts, no hospital floors, no long sterile hallways. None of the staff wore scrubs or institutional name tags, making it hard to distinguish the residents from the employees and visitors, which I discovered was precisely the point. My tour guides, Ellen and Ken, the home's administrators, introduced me to each resident. Lynn, this is my friend Dorothy. Dorothy, this is my new friend Lynn. Lynn, I'd like you to meet my friend John. The residents were called friends, not patients, not even residents, Ken explained. We use the word friends because, quite simply, we are friends. Other language puts up barriers, making an us and a them. We don't want those kinds of barriers here. We want a real community. No sooner had Ken said this than a woman slammed down her playing cards and began to shout at the woman seated next to her. Conflict is part of a real community too, Ken added. He calmly approached the angry woman and invited her to go on a walk with him. I learned that staff and volunteers were trained in the best friends approach to dementia care, a model that emphasizes developing positive, authentic relationships and respecting the basic rights of people with dementia, such as the right to be treated as an adult. But it did not seem the caregivers were rotely following a prescribed protocol. Rather, a truly person-centered orientation and abiding commitment to mutual well-being had taken hold. This is the first time I've had a job that didn't feel like a job, Ellen commented. During my recent vacation, I literally couldn't wait to get back here and see everyone. The Greenhouse Project, founded by Bill Thomas, is another alternative model in which elder care occurs in small, affordable, egalitarian homes for even the most mentally and physically compromised residents. Each house provides 10 to 12 seniors with 4-hour nursing care within a homey environment, and the intention of returning dignity and control to elders. Other visionaries are focusing on the creation of dementia-inclusive neighborhoods. The Japanese gerontologist Emi Kiyoda's Ibasho cafes re-engage elders within their larger communities. These cafes, run by elders, are organic, informal gathering places for people in the surrounding community to find their ibasho, a place where one can feel at home and be oneself. Through intergenerational respect and sharing, the geriatrician Alan Power, in his book Dementia Beyond Disease, envisions an inclusive society in which models of segregation, including most forms of dementia-specific housing, are abandoned in favor of solutions that reintegrate those elders into the fabric of the larger community. This involves transforming personal values, redesigning neighborhoods, creating reciprocal intergenerational networks, and educating the general public about how to support neighbors living with dementia. Encountering these models offered me a window on what might be possible. While new options seem to be slowly spreading, there are 263 greenhouses in 32 states as of this writing. The supply of these kinds of revamped communities surely lags behind the demand. The home I visited in Vermont, which admits only low-income residents, already had 53 people on the waiting list. I do not believe there is one answer. I'm not searching for the cure, but I have come to see that there are more humane options. And part of finding solutions requires striking at the roots of the injustice and unearthing the forces behind displacement in the modern exile of older adults. The particular displacing mechanisms at work in senior housing reveal, I believe, an especial American sin, our idolatrous. The particular displacing mechanisms at work in senior housing reveal, I believe, an especial American sin, our idolatrous love affair with youth and the consequent obsession with eradicating non-youth. The proliferation of all programs and products anti-aging exposes the iniquity and issues forth ageism's strongest imperative: remove signs of aging and from the individual body and the body collective. In 2016, Americans spent about $16 billion on cosmetic surgery and minimally invasive procedures, and we may be exporting our obsession. The global market for anti-aging products and procedures is on the rise. According to Orbis Research, this market was worth $42.51 billion in 2018 and is estimated to reach $55.3 billion by 2023. It takes only a cursory glance at popular media to note the ubiquitous images of youth and the dearth of representation of elders, especially old people, rendered as rounded characters. Older adults are made to disappear from the marketplace, too. Once unemployed, adults aged 55 to 64 face a higher likelihood of staying unemployed long term. Research published by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco in 2017 revealed that older job applicants uniformly receive lower callback rates for interviews than similarly qualified younger applicants. For administrative assistant jobs, women aged 64 to 66 had a 47% lower callback rate than women aged 29 to 31. Behind ageism lies deeply ingrained values that I am convinced are linked to our economy. My mind turns from Mexico back to Bonne Terre. The fate of the lead belt seems to point to a system that perpetuates displacement. St. Joseph Lead Company, a firm based in New York, set up its first mining operation in 1864 in St. Francois County village of Bonne Terre. While small-scale mining had been in operation in the area for decades before its arrival, the firm, known among locals as St. Joe, introduced the deep earth diamond drill, which made the extraction process far more profitable because of its capacity to reach deposits hundreds of feet underground. Bonne Terre reportedly grew from small numbers to a city of several thousand by the early 20th century, largely due to the diamond drill and the establishment of an iron foundry and a railroad to process the ore. The earth was both good and lucrative, the two descriptors nearly synonymous in the American imagination. By the 1930s, St. Joe had become a monopoly, having gained control of all the smaller mining operations in the area, In 1972, having depleted local lead reserves, St. Joe shuttered its last mine in the old lead belt, knowing no other way to support itself. The region suffered decline similar to other 1970s industrialized communities, like those across the Rust Belt. In 2015, 43 years after St. Joe ceased operations in the old lead belt, 1/5 of St. Francois County residents lived in poverty. Only 7% of Bonne Terre residents had a bachelor's degree or higher. The national average is 33%, and nearly 16% of residents under 65 years old did not have health insurance, almost double the national average. In 2018, the EPA reported that in the 3 zip codes that encompass the old lead belt, between 9.3 and 16.7% of children had elevated lead levels. The national average is 2.5%. St. Joe created locally dependency on its jobs and predictably did not remain committed to the place and its people beyond their immediate use value. This is, of course, often the industrial ethos. When profit can be maximized, workers and their land are quickly exploited. They are quickly discarded when the project is exhausted. The small history of the old lead belt points to a larger history of elite economic interests overriding the local long-term well-being of the individual and collective body. I see this same dynamic, these same values reflected in the ageism that underwrites elder displacement. In the industrialist framework, the body is imagined as machinery. It is only as good as its capacity to produce like a machine. Machines don't mature. They either work or they get replaced by ones that do. Old bodies are merely worn out machines that possess suboptimal parts. They are past their prime, on the decline, sliding down to uselessness. If they have not already, elders join the ranks of others pushed aside by market values, the poor and developmentally disabled, for instance, thrown off the line, discarded and replaced. When what is profitable is good and what is good profitable, then persons who no longer produce, including the most rudimentary goods like coherent thoughts and sentences, are in danger of abandonment. And as with old model machines, when old bodies become obsolete, we have a disposal problem. There are so many old machines in such limited landfill space. There are so many old people in such limited space in our private and public lives. By 2030, older people will outnumber children. For the first time in U.S. history, 1 in every 5 residents will be of retirement age. If older people have become no longer relevant to the machinations of modern life, we face the question, where do we put them? The farmer and writer Wendell Berry warns that an economy consumed by the immediate and obvious use of something, whose worth is judged by its monetary value, marginalizes the young and the old, who are living either before or after the time of their social utility, Berry writes. Any organism that is not contributing obviously and directly to the workings of the economy is now endangered. I read Berry's observation against the backdrop of my grandfather's repeated moves. Berry's critique hits close to home for me and resonated with my growing understanding of the connections among declinism, ageism, elder displacement, and the framework of our economy. The frail body, like the population of a town whose natural resources have been depleted, is now in danger of neglect, abandonment, and forced relocation. In this schema, aging and the increased need for assistance are problems to manage and resolve. And the growing percentage of the population over 65 is an impending natural disaster, a silver tsunami that imperils the nation. But a less fatalistic approach is possible. If we shift our thinking and readjust our economy, we can begin to encounter and support old age as a normal, multifaceted aspect of life. If we are not old already, most of us hope to survive into old age. This rather basic impulse not to die young should offer some motive to consider the ramifications of our present order and the impermanence of our social utility. April 19th, 2013, in New Mexico, Missouri, in the day room on the skilled nursing floor where he had moved just a few weeks before, Dr. Jack Mullen celebrated his 90th birthday. I was told the card I sent him was pinned up on the door to his new room, where his twin bed sat to the right of the retractable curtain. I have no idea whether or not anyone read the card to him, or if they assumed he wouldn't understand anyway. My mom sent me a video. Jack is in his wheelchair clapping as the small gathering of family sings happy birthday. His youngest great-granddaughter waves a red pom-pom. His oldest daughter is taking a picture. His sons-in-law look strained in their singing and clapping. On the table side, Jack sits a gift bag, a small cake, and a half gallon of 2% milk. On this same day, 1,030 miles from Mexico, in Princeton, New Jersey, in 1879 Hall, the building of Woodrow Wilson's office, when he served as the university's president before becoming the president, I watched my spouse defend his 470-page dissertation in a conference room full of the most elite scholars in his field. We clapped when the chair of his committee pronounced him Dr. Ryan Harper. We raised our flutes of champagne and toasted to him in the 1879 Hall Lounge, where we nibbled on cheese and crackers, miniature pastries and fruit. There was laughter and hugs and palpable relief at the completion of such a passage. I sent a proud email that evening to my friends. Ryan successfully, and I may say quite brilliantly, defended his dissertation this morning. I was applauding an intellectual feat among some of the best minds in the world as a bucolic university town nestled in the center of power, halfway between New York City and Philadelphia. In the shadow of presidents and future presidents, Jack was applauding and being applauded. At a remove from the center of anything, in the shadow of monocultures and ethanol refineries, unable to speak his children's names, unable to play his instruments, unable to control his bowels, I applauded scholastic achievement. They applauded sheer survival. The inexplicable persistence in the midst of long-standing brain disease. This dispatch from Mexico reminded me that we never know when our circumstances will change, when we might swap one form of applause for another, or exchange a mahogany-appointed lecture hall for a linoleum-floored, multifunction room. Rather than only a site of dislocation, perhaps Mexico was a place where Jack could find welcome relief, where he could, as James Taylor's song suggests, lose his load and leave his mind behind. In Mexico, Jack bonded with Linda, a retired nurse hired by my mom to visit him several times a week. A Mexico local, Linda was a foreigner to my family and me. Since she did not know Jack before his move into the facility, Linda was free to be with him just as he was. He didn't have to work to maintain a former identity, or play a former role, or keep a storyline intact. For the first time since his wife's death, Jack had a companion who was there for him consistently. A companion who, for the first time in a decade, was not involved directly in assisting him with hygiene, meals, or medication. No wonder he perked up. No wonder he perked up when he saw her. They sat together, sipping McDonald's coffee, slowly bringing in the new day. To build a life in exile, one must draw more upon inner states than outer forms. Many of the exiled ancient Israelites came to understand the precepts of their faith as somehow lodged within them, written upon their hearts, not located in a particular city and its temple. The mystics of faith affirm this wisdom, a 14th century guide to contemplation. The cloud of unknowing, whose writer succeeded in remaining anonymous, says, nowhere physically is everywhere spiritually. Nowhere physically is everywhere spiritually. Understand this clearly. Your spiritual work is not located in any particular place. Viewed from this angle, Mexico could be the site of freedom, a monastery, a retreat, a hideaway where Jack could live without the judgment of others who held him into a different time. The freedom of a physical nowhere, a placelessness, could make way for spiritual ubiquity, to be finally abandoned. Since he no longer had or could maintain the various masks of white middle-class manhood, perhaps he could relax into himself at last, with a new companion who understood him as he was. Mexico, a nowhere place, became uniquely his place. I located only through him a place only through which I could locate him, neither withering in the long shadow of his former self, nor subsumed in his daughter's new Columbia life. He could reside in a new land, his land, a kind of pure land. I don't believe this displacement is holy, that people who are displaced should give thanks for the spiritual opportunity, but I have begun to hope, lately, that spiritual work, what I see as the yearning for and the mysterious manifestation of love, meaning, and purpose, can at least persist in the midst of exile. Jack had never seemed poor in spirit or meek. I never sensed a trace of self-doubt in him, never saw him shrink from the spotlight, not even in the early years of his dementia. He had loved the attractions of life and drank deeply from life's various cups. But the time of indulgence was over, and the path had turned spare and arid. In his final years, humility seemed near to him. One way I could read his flat affect, I suppose, was as hallowedness, that he had touched a new place within himself, meek and mild, free from what is assertive, controlled, and strong. He was inheriting the earth. He was losing his life only to find it. It was his was the kingdom in heaven, not in a saccharine of triumphal way, not in a saccharine or triumphal way, not that his struggle reduced to spiritual lesson he had to learn. I simply hold on to the hope that his secret heart knew a certain secret happiness. There is no one story that puts all the pieces in place, no one border that can be drawn and guarded that contains the total of his Mexico, or that contains the wide and sprawling territories of any life. Borders are crossed, boundaries move. We keep searching for them, creating them, relocating them, and with each step we uncover a contour, a plain, a valley, a hill that we had not noticed or recognized or named before. One legendary account says that Mexico, Missouri got its name by a certain convenience of signage. L. Mitchell White, editor of the Mexico Ledger in the 1960s, while admitting that his history might be shaky, reported that the town's first settlers found a wooden sign among the trail. The marker pointed southwest, and on it had been painted Mexico. The settlers figured that rather than replace the sign, they might as well call their town Mexico. I initially balked at what seemed like the settlers' lack of originality and self-respect in such haphazard naming, but perhaps they simply took the practical and humble course. At its inception, Mexico assumed itself to be a passageway to somewhere else, a place that points in the direction of another place, like a finger pointing to the moon, and because of Jack, Mexico became somewhere to me, pointing me to him and to the swaying pin oak that held his attention in the field on our last visit, to light and solitude and the recesses of a placeless home.